Good morning. My name is Karen Righthand, and I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing for SCS Global Services, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. I hope all is well where you are. We are all working remotely, and we've put together this short webinar for you, and we're happy to be presenting to you today. Hopefully, we won't have any technology glitches, and everything will go smoothly. I do want to cover a few housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar, and the recording link will be sent out after the webinar, probably within 24 hours. The webinar is expected to only be a short webinar, probably around 30 minutes of content and a 15-minute Q&A at the end. So you can just be prepared for that length. And I do want to remind everyone that we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. So please, as questions occur to you, type them into the question box. You will see the question box in your dashboard, and you just type your questions into the dashboard there, and I will receive them, and we will be asking questions after the webinar. So I'd like to thank you for joining the webinar. I'd like to say just a few words about SCS Global Services, in case you're not familiar with us. We are a trusted leader in the global third-party environmental sustainability auditing, testing, and standards development area. We work across all sectors, including natural resources, food and agriculture, consumer goods, the built environment, metals and mining, and more. Over the course of SCS's 36 years in the sustainability space, we've seen many changes. Globalization and complex supply chains are now the norm. Regardless of what business sector you work in, you are being asked to have visibility into metrics that are material to your business. Maybe it's deforestation, conflict minerals, fair labor practices, greenhouse gas emissions, many different things. Whatever the metrics are, this can be a daunting task for businesses with complex supply chains. It's one thing to collect data, but what are the KPIs? What is the analysis? Where do you need improvement? These are all questions we'll address in this webinar. The webinar is meant to be just a brief snapshot into tools and techniques, but the solutions tend to be highly customized. So if there is content here that's interesting to you, please contact us afterwards and we can talk more about your individual situation. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Tobias Schultz. He is our Director of Research and Development. He's been with SCS for over 9 years. He develops new services by harnessing research and innovation. And the programs that he has developed include our Sustainably Grown Diamond program, virtual auditing techniques, new climate accounting methods and ISO standards, and this service, which we're developing to focus on supply chain sustainability. And with that, I will turn it over to Tobias. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen, and thanks everyone for joining us today. And yes, I'll be talking here about the Sustainable Supply Chain Service, and I'll be giving a high-level view, as Karen said, companies' needs and the solutions we would offer for supply chain for solutions for a specific company are going to be highly individualized. This is just going to be a high-level view of the common elements that companies experience. So coronavirus makes achieving sustainability goals even more difficult. Goals that were already difficult to achieve for various reasons are just being made even more difficult in a world where travel is restricted, site access might be limited, and other types of business disruptions are going on around the whole world. Now, as your company finds ways to adjust to this new reality, there's such as diversifying your supply chain base. This will introduce new risks. Travel restrictions obviously limit the ability to do audits and inspections. Supply chain greenhouse gas footprints will change as supply chains change. And SCS's tools can help achieve sustainability goals despite these disruptions. And again, Karen said it, I said it, and I'll say it again, that supply chain solutions must be adapted for your unique company situation. Your company is unique. The sustainability goals that your company has are unique. solutions have to be tailored for your unique situation and your unique goals. And what SCS focuses on is giving you just what you need and not giving you any more than that. So not trying to sell you a Cadillac when all you might need is a trusty Honda Civic, to really focus just on what's needed for your unique situation. What are some applications of SCS's supply chain tools? I keep referring to sustainable supply chain, but that's really, I'm using that as a catch-all term. This can include all kinds of different applications and needs for supply chain management. So things like greenhouse gas emissions management, carbon neutrality, achieving net zero deforestation, compliance with Dodd-Frank Section 1504 on conflict minerals management and the new EU due diligence requirements, assuring suppliers comply with FSMA, FSVP, assuring compliance with responsible sourcing policies, establishing chain of custody and traceability of products, and water and waste management in the supply chain. These are all examples of sustainability related goals that companies must interact with their supply chain in order to achieve. And particularly for companies with large and complex supply chains, this requires really diligent work and quite a lot of effort. And that's exactly where SCS's tools and expertise are intended to support. When you have a complex supply chain and complex concrete sustainability goals you're trying to achieve across that supply chain. So what are the key process steps in SCS's service? So this fits into 4 overall steps. First, step 1 is defining the key performance indicators and metrics. It's really important to define these indicators and metrics upfront and spend a lot of time determining them and defining them very clearly, so that the rest of the steps can be done in a way which is going to help achieve your goals. Because you have to define your metrics to achieve your goals, and whatever data you collect and analysis you do, it will all just be geared towards fulfilling certain metrics and indicators. So you have to make sure those indicators and metrics align with the goals that you have. Once they're defined, you move into your step 2, the data gathering and supplier outreach process. So this involves a variety of strategies for outreaching to suppliers, getting the data that you need from them, validating that data, and then feeding that into step 3, which is the analysis of those suppliers. So once you have all that data in, what do you do with it? You have to do different forms of analysis and calculation in order to create those key performance indicators and metrics that you defined in step 1. Once you've done that analysis, then you move on to step 4, reporting. Now, reporting could be nothing more than internally focused IT dashboard that you use just for internal company decision making, or it could be as sophisticated as having a detailed report that you have to submit to a regulatory entity or to some other type of entity outside of your organization. And SCS can help whatever your reporting needs are. Ongoing training and supports needed for all of these steps. There's complexity involved in every single one, and that complexity varies based on your individual situation. So SCS also offers ongoing training and support to help fulfill each one of these steps. So this is a very high level summary of key process steps. I'll now go into some more depth on each one. So step 1, defining key performance metrics. So these really depend on a case-by-case basis based on your company situation. So this is where really the unique part of your company and the unique parts of your goals really have to be brought together, and coherent and cogent and relevant metrics have to be defined. Some tips on doing this, in defining these metrics. Your metrics depend on your goals and on your data. So not just on your goals, but also on the data that you have. If you have metrics based on data that cannot realistically be brought together, then that metric is not something that you can ever implement. Conversely, if you have a metric that has no relation to your goals, then that metric is not going to be of a whole lot of use. So you really have to define those metrics not only based on the goals you want to achieve, but also on the data that you have on hand and the data that your suppliers can realistically give you in your supply chain. Even very simple metrics can be very useful, and I'll show some examples of metrics that range from complex to very simple. But just because you're trying to do a calculation and have a set of metrics doesn't mean that some of those metrics can't be very, very simple. And sometimes simple metrics can give you all the information you need. Simple metrics also have the advantage of being a lot more transparent and easier to understand. You're not losing information, wrapping it up into an index where you obscure the information that went into that number. Too many metrics can lead to confusion. So if you end up with a list of 20 or 25 metrics, that's probably too many, no matter what your sustainability goals. Conversely, if you have too few metrics, that can obscure your supply chain condition. And really, there's a art to finding the correct number, type, and balance of metrics to really give you the information you need without also being completely overwhelming. So I'll go through example metrics for a company creating a conflict minerals report. I'll also show an example for a company for work we've done on achieving net zero deforestation and metrics for that application. But again, we would craft metrics that are tailored to your unique situation, even if you have sustainability goals that have nothing whatsoever to do with conflict minerals reporting or deforestation. We can still work with you to craft metrics. I'm just going to use these concrete applications to bring some of these points home. So focusing on conflict minerals reporting application, so some of the metrics that we have developed for this particular company. Tracking of supplier reporting status. This is again some very simple metrics that again can be very useful. So percent of suppliers which map their supply chain and know the origin of their conflict minerals. I mean, those are very simple metrics. But even more simple, percent of suppliers which have not provided data or which provided incomplete data. That's an example of a very simple metric that could be applied in all kinds of different contexts outside of conflict minerals reporting. Because if you have dozens or hundreds of suppliers or even thousands of suppliers, even just understanding to what degree you have received data from that supply chain is really important to know and useful to know. Some other types of metrics that are more complex to speak to the sourcing of materials. So what fraction of materials are from conflict affected regions, how much of each type of conflict minerals consumed, gold, tungsten, tantalum, or tin, a source of materials by country. Those metrics are sort of a step up in complexity, not being as complicated as you might find in another application like greenhouse gas emissions management, but still a layer of complexity that, but also gives a layer of transparency into your supply chain that is really, really important. So for this particular company, they had to disclose specifically what materials are from conflict affected regions, and they had a desire to take steps to avoid sourcing from those regions or de-risk as much as possible when they were forced to do so. So some of these were actually the critical metrics of interest to them. Another example of developing metrics to support net zero deforestation goals. So net zero deforestation, these metrics can be even more unique and tailored because even what a company means by net zero deforestation can vary based on how they define forests and what forests they want to avoid deforesting from. So just here's a few examples and some types of analyses that we've done. So one thing we often do when we're or recommend when we're pursuing a net zero deforestation goal is to use as much satellite data as possible and to align forest definitions and deforestation definitions with the data that's available. In this case, there is satellite data available on a global basis for high conservation value forests and primary forests. So it's really important that definitions for deforestation align with these types of satellite data, particularly if we're looking at a global supply chain, because that's something we can actually do meaningfully and practically because there's satellite data sets available to do it. Once we've defined the types of forest in which we want to measure deforestation using this satellite data, we can then develop relevant metrics. So this again could be simple ones like the amount of wood that's actually trackable to forest of origin. More often we find that wood is only trackable to the mill of origin. Amount of priority forest lost within a country of origin. Show an example of a company that had been sourcing wood from Sweden. They didn't actually know to any more level of detail besides that they were sourcing from Sweden. But you're actually able to do a lot of analysis at a country level with deforestation in a very practical way. So one of the metrics that we used in this case was the amount of priority forest lost within a specific country of origin. Another one that's getting to a more level of sophistication is amount of priority forest lost within 150 miles of pulp mills. And that makes sense because wood, when it's harvested from a forest, is very rare that it transports more than around 150 miles, which is around 200 kilometers. Just the economics don't favor shipping large, heavy logs very far. So generally, even if you only know the source of wood back to the pulp mill, this would be for paper, for example, then you can still have a very good idea that that wood is coming from within 150 miles. And so you can get some metrics of risk based on how much priority forest is lost within pulp mills in your supply chain. Once you do that type of analysis, you can then do things like rank your pulp suppliers by amount of lost forest in the region. That can at least indicate the level of risk of sourcing from different pulp suppliers based on how much deforestation is going on in that region. Now, just some examples of the analysis we did in Sweden here. So this is a snapshot from the Global Forest Watch overlaying the intact forest landscapes and priority forest data sets. So intact forest landscapes we used in this case as a proxy for high conservation value forests. The details on this don't matter, just an example of how we can use satellite data to begin to really pick apart supply chain in detail. Global Forest Watch allows really streamlined, efficient analysis, not just on a country level, but actually even on a more granular level. So this just shows the overall forest change in Sweden over the last almost 20 years. So this is the type of analysis that we could do even within the region of a pulp mill as well. This again gives just levels of risk of deforestation associated with different pulp mills of origin. So this is the type of, once you have metrics defined and define them very succinctly and clearly, then we can pull from data sources like this to do these types of analyses. So once your key performance indicators and metrics have been developed, you can then move on to the data gathering process. And here I'll just share some tips on creating an effective strategy. Because you do have to think in terms of strategy when you're doing this data gathering, particularly if you have a supply chain that includes over 100 suppliers. It's not something you want to do on an ad hoc basis. It's important to be very strategic and deliberate in how you do that data collection. So some tips: if you need your supplier data, you should think of creating customized questionnaires. And again, this is where defining your metrics very carefully is important, because then you can focus your questionnaires only exactly on the data that you actually need. SCS has worked collecting supplier data in many, many different industries. And one key lesson we've learned is that the more questions you ask, the more chances there are for incomplete questionnaires or incorrect questionnaires. So really focusing down just on the custom list of questions that's pertinent to analyze your specific metrics is really important to have an effective and efficient data collection exercise. Do you need this information by a certain time frame? Do you have a reporting deadline for a regulatory body or for CDP or for something else? Well, you can give your suppliers a deadline so that they feel like they have a given time frame in order to complete the information. Do you have suppliers from different countries? Well, you might consider creating questionnaires in multiple languages, and that's something that SCS has capability to do in many different languages. We find that this can be very useful, particularly if you have supply chains in far-flung parts of the world, as most companies do in this day and age. Have your suppliers ever done this before? So in some supply chains and for some types of reporting, suppliers, this won't be the first time they have done this type of exercise. So something like conflict minerals reporting or even greenhouse gas emissions management, suppliers have probably done this type of data collection exercise before and have this type of data collected. But if you're wading into an area where suppliers have never done anything like this before, we find this to often be the case in cases like a net zero deforestation goal or cases like that. In those cases where it's really new territory for your suppliers, it's really important to provide them with lots of training materials. We recommend webinars focused on training for your suppliers, certainly as a minimum, particularly if you have a large number of suppliers. Because if you offer a lot of upfront training, that will minimize the back and forth that you end up with while you're actually collecting the data. So it's a situation where if you invest a little bit of time up front, it can save you a lot of bit of time during the exercise. So this type of training up front is very important during data gathering. Do you have a large number of suppliers? This is a case where we can help you with our automatic data collection and aggregation tools. This is where it starts to become very difficult and impractical to be trying to wade through Excel spreadsheets that you personally emailed to a large number of suppliers. Again, this just starts to become incredibly unwieldy, even over 20 suppliers, I would say, because it's quite difficult to track the responses and correct versus incomplete responses and wade through and track all of that, even for a few dozen suppliers, let alone if you have hundreds or thousands. So when you have such a large number of suppliers, this is where the automated data collection tools can be extremely useful. So I'm going to show some examples of questionnaires used by SCS. We'll pull these up. So I'll first show an example of the conflict minerals reporting template questionnaire. So this is a questionnaire that is templatized. So this is an example of one that if you're sending this to suppliers, it's something that they have probably seen before. And in fact, there's a polished template that is available that's distributed by the Responsible Minerals Initiative. But I use it as an example because it contains a lot of information that you'd be collecting for pretty much any questionnaire. Basic things like company information, types of products. And then you can start to see the types of questions that we'd be collecting. So in this case, are there 3 TGs, which in this case refers to tantalum, tin, tungsten, or gold? Are those in your products? Then there's a field to provide yes or no answer, and then provide comments on it as well. We always recommend in any custom questionnaire have a comments field for every single question. We find pretty much universally when suppliers of any kind are filling out data questionnaires, there's always comments and explanations they want to make and exceptions they might want to offer for certain questions. So I won't go into detail on this. I mean, these are just the flavor of types of questions in a standard questionnaire. You can see there's this ability to have drop-down menus, varying complexity with varying responses. This specific questionnaire actually has pre-filled information in the back end on terms of smelters. So this can be pre-populated if you know your smelter's name. We have these several fields here pre-populated, as you see, the location pre-populated. Product list hasn't been completed yet. This one's also got a good example of error checking, and this is something that we can build into any type of custom questionnaire, where it will automatically flag questions that are incomplete or erroneous. And there can be varying levels of sophistication we can build into error checking, and this can be extremely useful if we build in automatic error checking or incompleteness checking to your process, because that can avoid the need for humans to look at really basic types of errors and incompleteness checks that could be done much more efficiently with just a simple script. I'll also show an example of a greenhouse gas questionnaire. So this is just one snapshot from one part of a larger greenhouse gas questionnaire showing the types of data. And greenhouse gas questionnaires are in many ways the most complex type of questionnaire that you'd ever be sending out to your suppliers, because you have to collect really granular data in terms of fuel use and equipment use and purchase goods and services. And so you see when we're distributing a questionnaire like this, we have all kinds of instructions that we offer at the top. This is an example of training built into the spreadsheet. And then more drop-down fields and even explanatory notes in terms of what year are you reporting for, what's the type of activity. You can see these are pre-filled in terms of what's the activity. This was intended for a farming operation. So is this farming operations, transport of product, transport of employees, what's your mode of transport, water, road, rail or aircraft, vehicle type. You can see the other types of fields we have in here, volume used, total cost, even fields for stationary sources and electricity generated on site. So this is an example of a highly customized and highly detailed questionnaire. That's basically the status quo for greenhouse gas management. You need to be asking this kind of data collection from your suppliers if you want to get to any level of accuracy. And these are just examples. We can develop customized questionnaires that focus specifically on your specific needs. So I'll go back to my slides now. And I'll now show an example of how our data collection system works in an automated application. This is just a short video from my colleague Ben Mathis summarizing how our automated data collection tools work.
SCS will streamline gathering
I'm sorry.
supply chain data for your company. First, we contact your suppliers with a standardized questionnaire. The supplier fills their information into the form, then uploads it on our online portal. Once the data is uploaded, it is stored alongside the forms from the rest of your suppliers. Here they can be aggregated and
Tobias,
analyzed.
we're not seeing the video.
Okay.
Here we see.
Sorry, I was afraid of that. I have to stop sharing and start again.
I see it now.
Okay. Tell me if you do not hear the audio in just a moment.
SCS will streamline gathering supply chain data for your company. First, we contact your suppliers with a standardized questionnaire. The supplier fills their information into the form, then uploads it on our online portal. Once the data is uploaded, it is stored alongside the forms from the rest of your suppliers. Here they can be aggregated and analyzed as needed. Here we see some examples of what can be done with that data. Graphs, charts, and maps can be updated every time a supplier sends in a questionnaire, ensuring you are always working with accurate information.
And that was just an example of the type of automated data collection we can do. We can build, just as we build customized metrics, we can help to build customized data collection systems that integrate directly with your system and fit best with the way that you do business. We're not trying to force any specific software solution onto you. We want to be flexible and again, give you what you need without selling you any more than that. So some notes now on verifying your data, because it's one step to get the data in the door, but verifying that it's accurate is also very important. So I referred to automatic error checking. That's something that we can build into the Excel questionnaires. We can do more sophisticated error checks too on the back end with different software tools. And that could be just as simple as requiring certain critical questions to be filled in. So obvious ones are supplier has to provide their company name and contact information, but you may have other critical questions that you don't even want to accept the questionnaire without them being completed. We can do things much more sophisticated too, whereas we could look for numerical checks, make sure find that if a number is 1,000 or 1,000,000 times more than all other suppliers, then perhaps there's an error in there. So we might return that as a flag, ask a supplier to double check their number and make sure it's correct. There's more sophisticated tools we can build in, and this is again something that's done on a highly customized basis and something we do just to expedite the whole process. We can also use artificial intelligence to detect anomalies. This is the most sophisticated type of error checking that we would do. So we might find instances where suppliers fill in a large number of different fields, and we can detect certain patterns and find outliers, real anomalies from those patterns as part of our error checking process. In automatic error checking, that can only take you so far. That's just one layer of error checking that we do. At the end of the day, we'll always have SCS experts that will review a random sample of supplier questionnaires that come in to ensure that we can have confidence in the data being provided. For really high-risk situations and suppliers where you really need to confirm the accuracy and authenticity, we can offer in-person site audits, or something that's a new offering for SCS, virtual site audits. Because I think, as everybody understands perfectly well now, in-person site audits can be extremely difficult, if not impossible right now, when travel is restricted and site access might be restricted, even if an auditor can get on site. So virtual site audits are more realistic at this point in time. They also have the benefit of being much cheaper because we don't have to ship people around. We can just ship some basic camera equipment. So verifying supplier data without ever setting foot on site. So I'll talk a little bit about our virtual site audit capabilities. So one of the core features that we do is we do video live stream with a person on site. So we have an auditor that's actually able to see live walking around on the site. Depending on the context and the situation, we'll also include other types of camera equipment, high resolution cameras, 360 video cameras, even things like temperature sensors and chemical sensors, depending on exactly what we're trying to verify and what we're trying to see at the site. We also will do GPS verification to ensure that an audit, virtual site audit, takes place where it's supposed to take place. This is just an example of GPS tracking completed at a virtual site audit. We also have AI capabilities where we have the ability to automatically detect things like signage and text, faces, and certain objects. This can be really important if we have a virtual site audit and we have an enormous amount of video information we're collected. We can do this type of AI analysis and identify people that are on site automatically. This virtual site audit is just an extra layer of verification on supplier data that we can provide. Once you have that data in and you validate it, the next step is analyzing your suppliers. And so this is something that, again, needs to be customized for your needs, and SCS will work with you to create an analysis dashboard that gives you the information you need when you need it. And our tools give you the control to change those reporting formats as well. So our intention is to empower you fully to see the data that you want when you want to see it. So some example screenshots of the type of tools we've completed. This shows mapping diagrams of smelters of origin in a conflict minerals program, fractions of supply chain mapped versus unmapped. Again, a very simple but important metric. Quantity of conflict minerals, again, using this example, where those conflict minerals are coming from by country. These are the types of reporting charts and demo information we can provide in a dashboard. We also build our tools on existing business intelligence software. And our intent here and our recognition here is that you don't need to hire expensive software engineers to get this information in the door. You need to have sustainability experts who know about the area of interest that you're working in. You don't need somebody that knows PHP or SQL. You need somebody that knows how supply chains operate and how materials flow through supply chains and where risk is going to be. So our focus here in this service is that we give you the tools you need for minimum cost and minimum training. This also gives you the advantage if you're already using any of these existing business intelligence software like Microsoft Power BI, Tableau, Zoho, or Sisense. We can integrate our dashboard tools directly in with the business intelligence that you're already collecting. So you don't even necessarily need any new software at all. You just end up with some extra charts and dialogues in the business intelligence software you're already using. So this is a live video I'll show here of an example of a Power BI application of business intelligence. Hold on just one moment. So you can see here, this is a map showing suppliers that have completed, declined, pending versus unresponsive solutions. So you can see this by geography. We can click through and look just at the completed suppliers where they're located, declined, pending, unresponsive. You can see where these different suppliers are located. This is an example just of a map. We can then further filter this just looking at our tantalum suppliers, where they're located and their status of response. These are just examples of how we can segment out and look at where suppliers are and filter down to see where suppliers haven't completed questionnaires, where are they located, and this can give us you an understanding of just different regional differences in supply chain questionnaire completion. So here's some more examples of different charts. So you can see a pie chart here on the left showing sources or the amount of material, gold, tin, tungsten, tantalum being sourced. And again, supplier compliance with questionnaires in terms of pending, completed, unresponsive, and declined. And again, you have the ability to click through these charts, see different diagrams to further drill down and understand the data that's going on in your supply chain. So once you've completed your analysis, we can talk about reporting then. So if you just need internal access, then an IT dashboard can be sufficient for your purposes. But if you have to report externally, that's a whole different issue. You have to ensure that your key performance metrics and data that you collect aligns with whatever reporting needs you have. Again, whether that's for a regulatory body or CDP or something else, you need to make sure that the metrics that you're developing align with the reporting that you're going to need to do. If you have reports that have a deadline, you should make sure to plan well in advance. Our experience with supplier data collection is almost no matter how well you plan, it always takes more time than you think it will. And much of that's not in your control. It has to do with suppliers completing information. So it's really important to give extra time so that you can gather that data in plenty of time to create reports. And as you can imagine, this whole process can be very complicated and overwhelming. And we're here to help you as you go through that. A part of our service is that we offer dedicated support from subject matter experts, so you can really have the best type of expertise involved during this whole process. And so with that, we can start taking questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tobias. That was wonderful. The questions are starting to come through, and I would encourage anyone that has a question, just please type it into the question docket and we'll take them one at a time. So the first question that came through is that we showed a great international supply chain example with mapping of suppliers, and this person wonders, I assume that these abilities can be applied more granularly as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think the example you're referring to is just doing analyses on a country level, mapping suppliers at that larger level. We can map it down to a much more granular level. It depends somewhat on the supply chain and what your suppliers, the information they have and are willing to provide to you. But for something like conflict minerals, you can generally get down to the smelter of origin very straightforwardly. Paper products, you can for sure get back to country of origin, but usually get back to province or pulp mill of origin. So we can certainly do more granular tools and work with supply chain to get much more granular to do that. Definitely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And another question we have is, Tobias, would we create responsible sourcing policy as part of this process?
So this is something that we can certainly do and have done in the past. So in that case, we're working with you from the very beginning of the process to map out your sustainability goals and what goes into your responsible sourcing policy and then execute against that. So if that's something that you're interested in, then yes, we can certainly work to do that.
Mm-hmm. And what type of artificial intelligence would we use to analyze suppliers?
That's a very good question. And we would use cluster analysis algorithms like k-means to look for specific clusters in your data and then look for departures from those clusters. So see suppliers that really look really erroneous compared to all the other data that was provided by other types of suppliers. And what that algorithm is and how we would do that and really depends on the type of data you're collecting and how many suppliers you have that data from.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, it appears that we've answered most of the questions that we have here. I will remind everyone that we will be sending out the recording for this webinar after the webinar is completed and we process the recording, probably take place in the next day. And if you have specific questions for us that you would like to direct, please just email myself or Tobias, and we will do our best to get back to you in a short order of time. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. We really appreciate it. I hope everyone takes care, and we'll see you in the sustainability world later. Thank you so much.